This is Eruptor, and coming up, we're discussing the interactive voiceover strike right here.
Well, this is our inaugural Straight Talk VO, and lucky us, this is have a wonderful panel that's joined us. I'm Kate McClanahan from Actor Sound Advice, founder of Actor Sound Advice, and I have with me Graham Spicer. Go ahead, Graham, and you can introduce everybody around. How about that?
Fantastic, thanks. So I'm Graham Spicer, and we're so glad that you're here for this, very first vlog. We're so excited to be talking about the outcomes from the recent settlement and ratification of the interactive media agreement between SAG-AFTRA and the largest of the video game companies. It was a big deal when the strike happened. It was a big deal with the settlement, and we're here to explore what that settlement looks like today. With us is just an A-list panel to talk us through this. We have with us Jonathan Handel, who's an entertainment attorney and the contributing editor for The Hollywood Reporter. We have Keythe Farley, who was the chair of SAG-AFTRA's Interactive Negotiating Committee. So we're going to have it straight from the horse's mouth in the case of Keythe. And we have with us Jennifer Hale, who is a prolific video game actor and a proud SAG-AFTRA member. So welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Jonathan, as the journalist amongst us, perhaps you can take just a couple of minutes to set the context for us. What exactly led to this strike, and how did it finally settle out?
Well, to put this in context, this is an area that SAG-AFTRA has some penetration in, but it doesn't control the way it controls the labor supply in film and television. You want to make an economically significant film, you want to make an economically significant or network television show, Netflix show, whatever, you are absolutely going to want to use SAG-AFTRA actors. But in the voice world, it's a little more complicated. There is non-union work that is done, significant amount of it actually, and that makes the union's position, bargaining leverage, a more difficult one. The union, for its part, wanted to improve the working conditions, the wages, the safety, and various other aspects of the work that's done. And so the union had some pretty significant goals here. Those goals collided with the hard reality that the union does not have as much leverage as it does in traditional scripted filmed entertainment, film and TV. And I think that's part of what led to a strike. Now, a strike, I should say, that lasted, I guess, over a year, and was the longest strike that SAG-AFTRA or SAG or AFTRA, the predecessor unions, has ever had.
Right.
Right. And certainly in quite some long time. Probably the four major issues that the union was looking for were, first of all, secondary compensation. Now that was kind of a code word for residuals. Residuals in film and television are royalties that actors and also writers, directors, and certain others get paid when a program is either rerun or is reused in a different medium. SAG-AFTRA wanted to bring that same concept to voiceover work in interactive, not just voiceover, but also motion capture or performance capture work in interactive as well. Secondly, would be transparency. When an actor works on a movie or TV show, they know what they're auditioning for and what show they ultimately get or don't get. But video games have a degree of secrecy and confidentiality involved in them as the programming is being created, as the game is being created. And so often actors don't get told, historically haven't gotten told anything about what they're auditioning for. the name of the project, the type of the project, whether there is going to be sexual content or loud, vocally stressful noises that have to be made. All of that is has often been a mystery. Thirdly, two items related to safety. And you think, well, a video game, a voiceover work, safety, what are you talking about? But the first of the two safety issues is, in fact, vocal stress. It's one thing to sit here and talk to you guys. It's another thing to have to scream and shout and grunt and make dying sounds and so on and so forth for a number of hours. And in fact, performers have suffered medical problems from this, from vocal stress, damage to vocal cords, bleeding. Also, we don't have to get into the details, but there can be, let's say, issues of that sort. Finally, stunt safety. There is not as much of a tradition, according to the union, about supplying stunt coordinators for performance capture work, including performance capture work that may be dangerous, that constitutes a stunt. Whereas you would have that sort of supervision and extra buffer of safety in film and television. So those are
Jonathan, before you proceed, there's a number of people who are going to be watching this vlog who don't understand this whole concept of performance capture or motion capture. Can you give us the little 30-second version of what that's all about?
Sure. When you see an actor acting on screen, that's usually the actor acting on screen. But when you see a computer-generated image, a lifelike image that, for example, is playing, Madden football or shooting at you or whatever, with the most amazingly lifelike motions, the face, the gestures, and the body and stuff, that stuff is not generated usually by creating animation from scratch in the computer. It's generated by having a human performer dress in typically, say, a green suit, but with dots on it, not necessarily a green suit, but a suit of some sort, let's just say, with dots on it or other mechanisms, so that the computer-controlled camera can track where someone's eyebrow is, where their hand is, what their gestures are, how they're running, and then take that data and use it to animate an artificially generated character. So the human being is giving a performance or motion that is then being captured and translated into the animated character.
So is it fair to say then that the line between being an on-camera actor and a voice actor, at least in the genre of video games, is getting pretty fuzzy?
Well, I wouldn't say that line is fuzzy, but rather I'd say that those are the two key ways that human actors perform in video games. They may perform as a voice actor, in which case they are likely to be someone who is an expert at voice work or a celebrity with a recognizable voice, and they're performing, in a booth in front of a microphone, let's say, with foam and padded sound booth and all that kind of thing, like a radio sound booth. Motion capture, performance capture, they're performing on a small sound stage that's basically featureless, so that the only thing that the camera really is capturing is the actor's performance. So two separate jobs, but both involve SAG-AFTRA members working in video games.
I'd like to interject with Keythe. Keythe, you direct. You don't just act in, these productions. It's how you became the chair for SAG-AFTRA during this strike and what have you too, correct? But you also direct motion capture and what have you as well, correct?
That's true. I do a lot of work. Probably best known as a voice director, projects like Call of Duty Black Ops 3, most recently Final Fantasy 15, some of the God of War, worked on those, Transformers, etc. So I have an interesting vantage point in that I meet all of the actors that do this work by dint of the fact that I cast them and direct them. So I've been listening to actors talk about this since I really started working in video games, which interestingly enough was right about the time of the 2004-2005 contract dispute where we almost went on strike
Right.
back then.
Yeah. And thanks, Jen, for joining us. You made it. You made it great.
Yeah, I've been here. I've just been listening because I was mobile. Yeah.
Yeah, good. I wanted to ask Keythe very quickly because I know, Keythe, you direct this, and pardon me, Jonathan, because it's like parlaying off of what you were just talking about, the key points of why the strike, why we had the strike in the first place. And it was all these elements. Graham and I were having a little discussion before we even began today, and Graham being in Toronto and not being a SAG-AFTRA talent, as I understood it, there were, these were the elements, and there was, people that were not necessarily feeling safe, and they were, they'd go in for a voiceover and they'd come out with a, broken collarbone, or they sprained their ankle because they were doing motion capture and had no idea that that's what they were, getting assigned to do. And, so, and as I understood that was a big part of why it wasn't just residuals and what have you. It was because a lot of people were getting, we're moving toward almost strictly motion capture from what I understand. And Jen and Keythe, I think you guys can probably speak to that probably more than anybody. Is that correct when it comes to video games?
I think we're in a transition phase now. I mean, there is a lot of performance capture that is going on. Folks like to do that, but there's still a good deal of vocal work that happens too. It's expensive to be on a PCAP stage with 77 cameras running all around you, and a lot of data going down the tube. And it's much more cost effective to have an actor in a booth reading lines, and then to have that animated. So it's a matter of what's the character. When I played Kellogg in Fallout 4, I did some facial capture, but did not do the motion capture. And frequently the motion capture will be done by an actor with physical gifts, and then the dialogue will then be subbed in afterwards.
Right. Yeah. And Jen, go ahead.
Yeah, more and more of the work is, as Keythe said, we're in a transitional period, and more of it is moving toward motion capture. Can you guys hear me okay? I just changed my setup. Okay. And the safety issue was, definitely not that someone would be surprised to find out they were doing mocap. You're doing mocap because you go to a totally different place and you suit up in the lovely black long johns with the dots all over them. But the issue would be, for example, one of our people was going to be strung up maybe 20, 30 feet in the air. And that's a stunt. And that needs someone there to verify that your rigging is good, because if you drop from that's a serious injury.
Yeah.
And they weren't having, there weren't stunt coordinator people present to guarantee that level of safety. We're working more and more in concert now with our stunt, brothers and sisters. The two things are beginning to merge. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things in this paradigm shift that has been one of the issues we're sorting out is that game companies have framed themselves as tech companies for a long time, but they're not they're a far cry from that now. They're very much entertainment companies at this point, and it's a matter of stepping into the realm and doing what entertainment companies do, taking care of the personnel and staff who make all those incredible profits possible in a way that ensures that pool of talent and labor will be there when you need them for the next project, because it's freelance work. So
that's a very I think accurate observation, and it has an effect on how the negotiations went, because the companies that the union was striking against, two of them come from the traditional entertainment sphere, Warner Brothers video game division and Disney Games. But the others do not. There were a total of about, it shifted a little bit, but from 9 to 11 companies in all that the union was on strike against. And companies like EA and Activision and other smaller companies that come from the tech world, as Jennifer just pointed out, their cultural ambassador to the entertainment world particularly to business aspects and legal aspects of the contract that was being negotiated, such as residuals, secondary compensation, really was one person, a man by the name of Scott Whitland, who was an attorney in private practice who represented the game companies. He is an entertainment labor attorney on the management side. So it's a very specialized, narrow niche, of which there are only about 8 to 12 lawyers in the country.
Wow.
Who specialize in this. Probably more like 8 than 12, honestly. So Scott is at a large national law firm, but his particular practice is at the intersection of labor law on the management side and entertainment. And so if he's telling his clients in the tech arena, you need to be careful about this residuals concept that they're asking for, because the way residuals grew in film and television, it started small, and it was for radio in the late 1930s when things were recorded and then rebroadcast for time zone shifting, and turned into a system where the total amount of entertainment residuals paid every year is $2.5 billion, billion with a B, and another close to $1 billion for commercial residuals. So you're talking something that started from almost non-existent origins and turned into $3.5 billion. Well, he's going to say to them, I'm not the fly on the wall, but I certainly can infer what he would have said. Don't give the union any sort of residuals, even residuals that can be bought out, which was one of the proposals, where there would be a bonus, a buyout
of a flat rate that's offered, for that particular project. And would that be done in advance? Was that what was proposed initially?
It wasn't what was proposed initially, but by the time we got to the strike, or before the strike, the union was willing to agree to a flat buyout, which would have meant that companies could have eliminated the residuals altogether, just paid the buyout and not paid the residuals. But even so, you'd say, well, so why do the companies object? I mean, because they were offering bonuses that in dollar amounts were very similar to the buyout that the union was asking for. The answer is, just to even have the concept, a whiff of the concept of residuals in the air would be anathema to a lawyer like Scott, and therefore that would be communicated to his clients. Don't go near that, because it's the camel's nose under the tent.
I'd like to, Jonathan, if I could join on to what you said, remind me of the year that you referenced when you referenced the beginning of the residual structure.
Sure. Residuals were first proposed. A lot of this is unpublished, actually. I've researched dissertations and so forth. Residuals were first proposed in 1933.
Right.
First achieved in 39 or 41.
Right. And so if you go from that initial, there's two factors that I want to clarify for the listeners. You quoted, $3.5 billion, I believe it was today. The fact is that our actual residual income has gone down. And the reason, the disconnect is that, number one, you've got the value of the dollar dropping in that same time period significantly. Number two, you've got cost of living increases in that same time, significant cost of increases, significant inflation. You get all these factors that make that $3.5 billion. I'd love to know what that is in 1941 dollars, because it's going to be significantly less, and spread over a larger talent pool because there's so much more product out there. So it's actually that our individual residuals we're receiving are significantly less than they used to be.
The aggregate amount of residuals being paid has increased dramatically, but as you point out, over far more individuals, and to the point where with the shifts in residuals formulas as different forms of new media have come online, streaming, Netflix, Apple download, iTunes, things like that, the residuals formulas for those kinds of reuses are significantly less lucrative, less plentiful for the actors, writers, and directors than formulas in network broadcasting. So what you're saying is correct. Although, again, this started from an origin where you're talking several $1,000s a year,
right?
Several billion. And I'm not making, by the way, to be clear, I'm not making the argument on behalf of management. I'm simply saying this is what Whitland would have been saying.
Understood.
And I'll jump in and just talk about the reason that residuals exist and the reason that actors and writers and directors have a residual income in the same way that producers of content do is an intellectual property argument, which is that the intellectual property of an author who from nothing creates a script, or a director who decides how that script is going to be shot, down to an actor who brings their intellectual property in the form of their performance. Mm-hmm. And how then this product that comes out at the end of it is then sold to networks or cable outlets or Netflix or Hulu. And the folks who produce the content are paid for that. And so the residual income says that the people who created that content should share in the prosperity of content that goes out into the world. And that's how a residual formula came into being.
So Keythe, the question I have then is, you're talking about the creators of the content. In the case of video games, there are other players that are also very involved in the creation of the content, the animators. Is there a case to be made then that the visual artists that are responsible for these characters should also be being compensated with residuals in some way?
Absolutely. And the fact of the matter is that many of them are. I've had discussions with developers that I've worked with who have told me that, hey, listen, if you guys get bonuses, it's coming out of my bonus. And who've also said to me, we're already bonusing so many people on these projects, I just don't know where the money's going to come from. And these are the companies that we're sitting across the table from. So the idea that nobody gets bonused on that side is not true. Many do. I think it's a great practice. And once again, it's rewarding the folks who create the intellectual property that you are marketing and selling and making money on.
That's developing that brand, correct? That's really kind of fleshing out that brand.
If I can add something to what Keythe is just saying.
Share in the prosperity that comes as a result of selling that content to consumers.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jennifer, please.
Just to add into what you were just saying, those same companies that say, I'm not giving them a bonus, that comes out of my bonus, when faced with the opportunity to hire anyone who's been on television for any amount of time and with any kind of recognition, ABC level, whatever, will turn around and drop 5 figures without thinking on a celebrity to come in and voice. And frequently we get brought in for scale to stunt voice the stuff that the celebrity couldn't do, the fight sounds, the battle stuff, things like that, to voice match them and make it all sound better. One of the things for me is, I've been in the business forever. I always think of residuals. We're not just paid for our time in the booth. We're paid for also the time we spend preparing our craft, so we're ready to go when we get in there. So it's a shorter session for people putting this project together.
Right.
And also for our exposure. We only have a certain amount of shelf life. It's like, who is Keythe Farley? Oh, get me Keythe Farley. Get me someone like Keythe Farley. Who is Keythe Farley? And when you've been exposed enough, then you have to go on the shelf. I'm always aware when I'm working a lot, I need to put half that money in the bank because I'm going to be out of style for a while. And that's what residuals are there to support us through in part. But a big piece of this, to go back to the meta picture for just a second, is a lot of this argument is the current conversation about cost of employment. And it's part of what I perceive to be the war on the middle class, which is why, initially I refer to these guys as the corporate 11, because that's what they are. We have a lot of game companies that we worked with, many, who are not part of that corporate mindset, that do get the value of talent. And they had no problem hiring us under our promulgated agreement, our interim contract, and moving forward in a really fantastic partnership. But this larger war on the middle class is, and I cite this statistic a lot, is that, in the 1980s, the average CEO's salary was 30 times employee wages. today, the average CEO's salary is 500 times employee wages.
Right.
Now, talk to me about the cost of employment in that structure.
I think, Jennifer, you're exactly right. And there's another point as well. The tech companies will say, residuals, the idea is so foreign to us, except it isn't. But it goes by a different name and a different formulation in the tech business. And what they are is stock options.
Yeah.
Okay? Programmers and even receptionists at startup companies, particularly at startup companies, get stock options. So I was a computer scientist before law school. Stock options didn't make me a gazillionaire, but they paid for a year of law school. And that was just from one company. Stock options, like residuals, are a form of drafting off of what Keythe said now, are a form of participation in the success of the enterprise. And I think the real question to be asked, looking at the meta-analysis that Jennifer, has framed, is not why should some people get residuals, but broadly speaking, why shouldn't everybody? And I mean, even including, now when I say residuals, obviously I mean residuals, stock options, bonuses, profit participation, different forms in different industries for different people. But why should the person who is slinging burgers at McDonald's not get some form of participation in the profit of that franchise location? There isn't a good answer to that.
So Keythe, at the end of all of this, we didn't get residuals. We got a bonus structure that's called something else. What exactly was the settlement when it came to this issue? And can it be equated in some way to residuals?
I think it can. I think there's an argument to be made. The bonus structure, which is, we don't need to get into all the numbers, but it starts at about $75 for the first session that an actor works, and then it grows the more sessions that you work. So by the end of 10 sessions or more, you've accrued a bonus payment of $2,100, which is not small change by any means. But those payments are not paid at the time that you work the session. They are due to be paid by the release date. So there's a chance that if a company wants to have an easy way to, just make those payments and be done with it, they can pay you your bonus at the time of your session. And if they'd rather put that off and pay it down the road a little ways, that's an option for them as well. So it functions as a form of residual income, although it doesn't adhere to what we commonly know as a residual, wherein you are paid each time your performance is broadcast, whether that's on cable TV or on an airplane or on network television. So there is a bonus structure, and it does come later than the time of work. So you could call it a form of residual income if you wanted to. I think it's a fairly good structure, and I think it's going to be good for our members in that instead of paying the bonuses that we had asked for before were blockbuster bonuses, where games that sold 2 million copies or more, the bonuses would trigger there. And we did that for a very specific reason, to get to Jonathan's point about penetration in the marketplace. It's true that if you take the video game marketplace, everything from Candy Crush on up to Final Fantasy 15, plug, that the penetration of voice actors is not great. There is non-union work. There are lots of games that don't use voiceover. But once you get into those blockbuster games, once you cross that 2 million unit or 2 million subscriber threshold, if you're talking about an Overwatch or a World of Warcraft or League of Legends, then you're talking about almost 100% penetration of union performers in that workspace. And so that's why we initially targeted it there. But I'll have to say that I'm very, very happy that our members are now working under a contract that pays them a very real bonus on every single job that they work under a union contract from this moment forward.
And that is from whether the game sells unit 1 or 2 million units, the bonus is still the same.
True.
Keith, am I correct in that we do still have the option for smaller companies or companies that would rather wait and see how it goes to still engage the promulgated agreement?
The answer is yes. The promulgated agreements that we put out while we were on strike, to sort of as a proof of concept, that the idea of making secondary payments is not something that's impossible. We had almost 60 games sign that promulgated agreement in the first 7 months of our contract. So while we'll have to shift, let me clarify. It was actually, there was an upfront bonus payment versus a secondary payment. So that it gave the developers and the producers an option of either paying upfront or paying when the game reached a certain sales threshold. While we'll have to modify the upfront portion of that, the idea of secondary compensation for a company that feels they'd rather wait until they're making money to pay this, who would rather share the wealth when there is wealth to be shared, has the option to sign under one of our high budget promulgated agreement and have that blockbuster bonus structure as an option.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, go ahead, John.
We also, over the course of the contract, created a low budget agreement for games that are made with a budget of $1.5 million or less, which also pays, has the option of either an upfront bonus or a back-end bonus, although it's structured a little bit differently, so that we can, again, increase our presence in that marketplace. And it's been really exciting to see the indie game companies realize how easy and beneficial it is to be able to use union performers in their work, even if they're not on a $80 or $100 million budget.
And I have to shout out to Sarah El-Maleh right now because she was instrumental in making that happen. Yeah.
I will join in that shout out.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
I want to switch gears for a second. I'd like to talk about transparency. And maybe, again, you could take just a few moments to frame up for us what this transparency issue was about. And then, again, Keythe and Jennifer, maybe you can explain to us where we ended up and how that's going to benefit SAG-AFTRA actors going forward.
Sure. And let me actually just first insert a little parenthetical about what a promulgated agreement is, because Keythe used that term several times, and people may not necessarily know what it means. Unions, particularly in an area that's not their dominant area where they control, everything like film and TV. Film and TV, they negotiate with a bunch of companies and reach a negotiated or so-called collectively bargained agreement. The agreement that was reached here several days ago is also a collectively bargained agreement, but as an alternative, as Keythe said, the union has an agreement that it wrote itself without negotiating with the other side, that it promulgates or offers to companies, and the companies can say, okay, we'll sign on to that one, even though that wasn't a negotiated agreement. So that's what a promulgated agreement is. Transparency. So again, the issue here was that, you think of it, you apply online at Glassdoor for something, and the company name is X. Well, that's really rather odd. And the job that you're applying for is, well, we can't really tell you what you're applying for, but we'd like to interview you, and we're very interested in your resume. Well, what the hell kind of a job interview process is that? In the normal world, that's nonsense. But
for actors, it's normal. It's like, no, it's
for actors,
unfortunately.
Another day in the park. Exactly. I mean, in particular, in video games, where, as I alluded to earlier, there is a degree of, trade secret confidentiality that needs to be maintained. And so the video game companies were very reluctant to agree to a solution where the actor would necessarily know the name of what they were, in fact, auditioning for or applying for. And also were reluctant to provide information on, is there going to be adult content? Is this going to be shooting that maybe is maybe I object to that. I don't want to work in that kind of thing. Smoking, I don't want, sexual in a way that, is tough or harsh or abusive or whatever and is against my comfort level or principles. None of that was necessarily always communicated to actors. And I'll let Keythe and Jennifer talk about what, in fact, the union was able to achieve part way in terms of transparency.
Well, I'll say, first of all, that I sort of stride the line between developers and actors. I work very closely with developers when I'm directing, and of course, I'm working very closely with actors as a director. So I understand very clearly the need for secrecy in this realm, because if you can get to market just ahead of that space adventure game, you can do real damage to someone who's invested a lot of money. And I think that part of what I want to get out going forward is the importance that actors and their representatives honor the non-disclosure agreements that we sign at the time of booking, particularly in light of the fact that we're getting more and more information now from the companies. The explanation that I made as clearly as I possibly could was, if you start with all the actors in Los Angeles who may get an audition for a lead in a video game, you probably don't want all of them to know the name of that game. Now, if you can limit that to the people who are cast in the project, and then if you can limit that further just to the representatives for those folks, then I think we've done a really great job of limiting the amount of exposure that a company has in giving out the actual title of the game. And that after an agent signs a non-disclosure agreement with the company, then they can find out exactly what game it is that their clients are working on. Now, we weren't able to get there. There are still some trust issues on that side, and there are some real honest grievances that they have, and that I think it's on us as performers and to show that we are trustworthy in that regard. Now, what we were able to achieve in terms of a compromise was to know the genre of the game. And again, to know if you're reprising a role that you've played in a previous game, whether there will be sexual content, whether there will be profanity, whether there'll be any sort of actions that might be morally objectionable to certain performers. They just don't want their image associated with that kind of performance. So we're grateful to have an increase in the amount of transparency that's available to actors. And I hope that as we go forward, we'll be able to continue the level of trust between these companies and agencies, and between agencies and their actors, so that we can get to a place where there's trust and folks feel comfortable.
What I don't understand is that if we draw an analogy to the movie business, producers generally proudly announce well in advance of even starting to shoot the first scene that they've got this movie deal and they're pulling that together, this movie, and it's this genre and it's based on this novel. Why is there so much more secrecy in the video game business than there is in kind of the more traditional Hollywood movie
Film or TV? Yeah,
I think it's because they came out of tech. What do you think, Keythe?
Well, I think there's also, I know of actors who received their sides on tinfoil so that they couldn't copy it. It was on reflective paper that they couldn't put in a machine and copy or fax or do anything like that. So there is a level of secrecy. Once you get to a certain level in Hollywood, there are folks who are extremely protective of their IP, particularly when it's a new franchise that's getting off the ground. So it's not always true that they just will willy-nilly announce. Also, when you get a side that says, come Robin, let's go to the Batcave, you kind of know what it is that you're auditioning for, whatever the code name might be.
Well, even for Walking Dead, if you're auditioning for the series, The Walking Dead, or a popular series, very often what they try to do in turn, like This Is Us and what have you, any of these TV series, what they tend to do is give the actors a scene that is not, it doesn't include the characters, but it's something around that. It's the same emotional content, same feel, what we want, or supposedly. And if you hear some of the actors' stories about auditioning for projects of that nature, they give them whole scenes that have nothing to do with those projects.
What was that movie, the Tom Cruise movie, Oblivion, was it, where he was out in space? I got brought in to read for the AI in that, and they did not give me anything. I went into the producers, and they just gave me like one of Kathy Bates' scenes from Misery. And I was like, I don't know what I'm reading for. It's just doing this scene. Yeah,
you're reading for emotional content is what it was, and it was for expression and all that kind of stuff that could mirror that scene or something to that effect. So that's typically how they work it around that sort of thing. So
yeah, long story short is there's a lot of different ways that folks decide how they want to market their material. And I think, again, it's important that actors and their agents respect a company's wishes for their IP to not be compromised, because they will have a very specific marketing plan designed to sell as many games as possible. And we have to understand that that's part of the business of show. And that we're there to provide the show aspect, which if the show aspect is not good, you don't have a business.
Yeah.
So
do you think there is more secrecy in games than there is in other forms of like what Graham was asking? Do you feel that's true? Do you think there is more secrecy in this?
I do.
I do too.
I do. I've experienced it. I've seen it.
I'm seeing it more in I'm seeing it more in animation as well. I don't from now. I mean, last couple of years, I'll walk into any project and I will I can't tell you what I did last week because I wiped it out of my mind. I Men in Black myself, and people will hand me things to sign, and I'm like, was I in that? Because it's done under a code name, and in games, 95% of the time we don't get the script ahead of time. I walk in, the script is there, I leave it there. Even now, animation callbacks, I walk in, there's a script, I will not take one with me. I will use theirs and I will leave it there. I'm not touching it. And I don't announce anything until I see other people talking about it on Twitter, the production company. And then I say, okay, yeah, I think I was there. I don't remember.
I think part of the, it's a very interesting question that Graham asked. And I think that part of the reason is the difference in the way financing works in the different industries. Financing movies can't be done, is really not done internally. People don't self-finance. They put together financing. So you have to be out in the community saying, I want to put together I want to package actors, writers, director, financing, tax credits, etc. for a movie about XYZ based on novel ABC. Likewise with television, if you're a production entity, you don't produce scripted television on spec. You sell it, pre-sell it as well to a network. You go out to to whatever network seems appropriate, or networks, and somebody will hopefully, have some interest.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas games tend to be internally financed, I think, by the companies, and so it's much more private to begin with, and I think that leads to a desire to a competitive advantage to keeping it that way, to keeping it private, and not letting your competitors know that in a year and a half or 3 years or 5 years, whatever the development cycle might be for the particular game, that you're going to come out with the next iteration of blah, 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 or with a totally new such and such. You have the ability to maintain secrecy because you're self-financing, so you use that secrecy.
And Jonathan, that insight right there is why I'm so glad you're on this panel. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Let's move on to safety, and let's tackle both of the safety issues separately. Let's start with the whole motion capture, the need for stunt coordinators, etc. So maybe again, Jonathan, you can just tee it up for us, and then we can throw it back to Keythe and to Jennifer for their thoughts on what we settled, what we got in the settlement, and what the implications are going forward.
Sure. The recorded entertainment industries, film, TV, and interactive, suffer from a concept that people refer to as cinematic immunity. That somehow things that for normal people would be unsafe, like standing on a high platform without a strap on, a harness on, and leaning over, and you're on a moving vehicle and capturing a shot because you need to get the shot, is somehow because you're shooting it for a camera that you're immune to the normal laws of physics and safety. And unfortunately, that's not at all true. And even where there are stunt coordinators, I mean, we saw the death this summer in the film industry, in the television business rather, of a stuntman in Atlanta who fell 20 feet onto a concrete floor head first. And why there wasn't padding in that particular location, but only in another location, is something that is still unclear. And that was with the presence of a stunt coordinator involved and an experienced stunt person. The issue in interactive is that sometimes neither of those things are true, that you don't have a stunt coordinator and that the actor is not a stunt performer and was not told in advance that, hey, as one of the panelists said, that your motion capture or performance capture work is not going to be on your own 2 feet, but you're going to be dangling from a wire and doing various stunts. That is, and that's the drama of making filmed entertainment. That's also an extremely dangerous situation without proper training and proper personnel.
And isn't that also double dipping? I mean, if you hire a talent, if I'm hired to do a film, I'm hired to do a film, but if I have to do ADR in that film, I'm paid to do that ADR, and and so on and so on and so on. So all these different forms of usage of my performance, did that play into the strike at all?
I'm not sure that it does. I mean, actually, typically for top stars, a certain number of days of ADR are provided at no additional.
Oh, there are a few, yeah. But I was just trying to put, my point is that there's multiple usage of this performance, and is that what played a part in this strike? And this really goes to, any of you guys who actually know about this, but because I really would like to know. I don't know about that, and it was my understanding that was a big part of why we went on strike in the first place. It was.
You're talking about about reuse of the data cloud that gets generated when there's performance capture or face capture, and as several of the panelists pointed out, face capture sometimes happens when you aren't knowing about it in advance. I came in to do voice work, and in addition to a microphone that
right. And I broke my tooth or something, or whatever. You have something on your face or something.
No, not.
It's that data cloud going to get reused without compensating me? And the answer is right now that there is very little protection in any of the SAG-AFTRA agreements, film, TV, or interactive, for reuse of the data cloud.
Wow.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this, but I mean, it may be useful to make the distinction between a performance capture, which is going to generally be a lead or a supporting character, where they're going to shoot it. I mean, you don't really shoot. I mean, you shoot the whole damn thing. And it's actors in the suits and 77 cameras all around you, and probably one that's shining on your face. And then as you go down the line, then there's all those characters that are the NPCs or non-player characters who also move. And frequently, there are actors who come in and perform the movements for those characters, who creep around the same volume that we use to shoot the scenes, and leap on things and fall on things, oftentimes repeatedly. So those are your motion capture actors. And frequently what we discovered happens to these folks is that the movements that they've done it's just I'm in a suit covered in dots. So once I've done the falls, once I've done the attacks, once I've done the creeping and the crawling and the leaping and the running and the walking, is that those cycles can then have a new skin put on them and be used in another game, which is a completely different issue than the idea of a stunt coordinator, which the language in our contract is exactly the same language. It's lifted directly from the TV theatrical agreement. So it should come as no surprise.
Stunt coordinator language, right?
Yes, indeed, the stunt coordinator language. And so it should come as no surprise. What we've had here is a problem of adherence. The fact that many developers and many publishers feel that they're not bound by that. So that piece of the contract is going to arbitration to make sure that it's enforceable and that it's enforced. So that it's one thing to talk about the dramatic, hanging from a wire, but it's another one to talk about a qualified stunt professional who is required to do a series of falls onto their right shoulder, onto their left shoulder, onto their back, into a roll, down a flight of stairs, from 2 feet, from 3 feet, leaping and landing. All of that stuff is done over and over and over again. And without a coordinator there to sort of be able to say, you got this. Frequently, and it's not any malicious intent. People aren't out there trying to hurt other people. But like Jonathan said, sometimes you just don't realize that the law of physics apply, especially when you take the humanity away by putting him in a black suit with dots on it. You sort of feel like it's a rag doll less than a human being. And we just want to make sure that there is a qualified, that what's already exists in the contract is being enforced. So
Jennifer,
that's where that piece goes.
Jennifer, have you ever been in a situation where you felt endangered?
I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm ready, fire, aim. I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And then I'm like, I had a mocap. It was for a couple years ago, and I had to do the Iron Man land multiple times. And this entire mocap shoot, this entire show, I did in 3-inch heels. I had to sprint. I was the bad guy. Sprint across the volume, jump off of big cubes, and they were all like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So sometimes you need a stunt person to protect you from yourself.
Well, that was a question I was going to ask, is at some point, isn't the actor responsible for just putting their hand up and saying, no, I'm not doing that?
Yes, but as an actor, you get into a situation that's not unlike some of the cultural issues we've been dealing with lately, where you want to say yes. You don't have the right to say no because you're concerned it's going to negatively impact your future.
Yeah, you'll never work again. It could totally box you out of, well, she's impossible. She didn't want to do that one jump. Do you remember that? I'm not going to use her again. And it could take, all it takes is that one thing. And you think, oh God, I don't want to be that guy. And yeah, it's not good. I think this is, it doesn't fall under harassment, but it falls under this kind of weird positioning that it puts you in a, you don't want to be the difficult actor, but man, is it a thin line between being difficult and being, so accommodating that you hurt yourself,
Everyone's physiologies are different. Every project is different. And that's why those boundaries are there, albeit artificially, but, sensibly, to say, all right, no, this is the purview of this person. This is the purview of that person. And once we get our adherence and enforcement in place, those boundaries are going to be there. It's like when you're on a set, and I'm guilty of this in the booth. The mic needs to come up an inch. I'm like, I'll just do it. And they're like, no, that's not on some stages. It's like, no, you don't do that. And there are reasons for that. I could break something. I could be an idiot and do it wrong. It looks good to me, but I don't have full information. So those artificial boundaries are there for a purpose.
Jonathan, the guys on the other side of the table, and they're not really represented here today. And do you think that there's nefarious intent here? Do you feel that they have the best interests of their actors at heart, or do you think that sometimes they are purposely putting their actors into harm's way?
Well, those are two different. Those questions are actually slightly different. I don't think that there's nefarious intent in most cases. It's not anyone's advantage to to deliberately want to hurt somebody else in this way. But I do think that in fact there are economic incentives sometimes to cut corners. A stunt coordinator is another person that you have to pay. Additional rigging, additional padding, additional practice for the stunt before doing it, whatever it might be. All of those things take time, and time is money in any production day. The reality is also that even in film and TV, where there is a longer history of more formalized production roles and production culture than in interactive, the responsibility for safety is diffused among the performer or the stunt performer anyways, the stunt coordinator, the first AD, the director, and the producer. And the producer is the employer. The director, though, is the one that really tells people what to do in general. The stunt coordinator is supposed to ensure that the stunt is safe, but a stunt is not supposed to be done until you ask the stunt performer, are you okay with it, and get a thumbs up or thumbs down. But there is this enormous pressure on performers, let alone on performers who are not themselves stunt performers and trained to do some of this, do this stuff. And it depends on whether you're talking stunt performer or not. There's enormous pressure to say, yeah, I've got this. And I think what you see with Jennifer is a very candid and exactly the example of that. And the trouble, you want someone who's gung-ho. The trouble with that is this person going to hurt themselves? And the interactive business, until 15 some odd years ago, 15 or so years, 20 years, whatever it is, video games did not have motion capture, performance capture. So it comes from a business that doesn't have a long history and culture, even if the imperfect one in film and television of looking at these concerns. So you put those things together and it's a volatile mix.
In the interest of trying to respect everyone's time, and we're already running just a little bit over, let's talk about vocal stress, because this was another big issue that we seem to have made some progress on. Keythe, can you tell us a little bit about where we ended up in this area of actors being able to better protect their instruments?
Yes, I'll start with a brief history of how this contract was formulated. We started, the SAG-AFTRA started by hiring an organizer who took voice actors in the interactive space out to lunch and said, what do you want to see in the contract? And then from those 80, 90 lunches, things start to emerge. And aside from the compensation, which we've already discussed, vocal stress was a hot second. Actors are really hurting themselves by screaming, or not just screaming, but textured voices. I play a character called Eruptor in Skylanders. He's a lava monster.
So his voice is very textured and down in the ear.
And that's a tough thing to sustain. Fortunately, the company I was working for, Activision, never scheduled more than 2 hours for a session on that project. So while we're moving in, I think, that direction, and again, if I'm talking to developers, I've had developers say to me, many of them say, we just went to 2 hours because we don't get anything good in the third hour. The actor's voice just starts to wear down.
That's true.
So while we were unable to codify that in contract language, we're definitely moving in the right direction. Again, this goes back to that sort of trust issue, like helping developers understand that they can trust an actor, that when they say, hey, listen, it's starting to get a little raw back here, we maybe got another 15, 20 minutes. So if there's anything important, let's get it done now. And educating them that what you're asking an actor to do in a session that's textured, or where you're screaming grenade or look out or over here,
loud battle talk, like, I'm going to be like this for the whole 4 hours because there's lots of ambient noise. Yeah.
What happens is it's a muscle like any other muscle. And while you might be able to go for a 4-hour walk, once you start to run, that time before you're exhausted is reduced. And if you're sprinting, it's reduced even further. And that's what happens with the voice. I can sit here and talk to you in this timbre all day long. But once I pitch it up or pitch it down or add texture or aspirate it by putting a lot of breath through it, then you're running down the clock more quickly. So I think that, again, there's no nefarious intent, although I've heard some folks who like to brag about how they've wasted actors and, oh yeah, you're going to bleed today, that sort of thing, or stories that we'd heard. I know those stories are less prevalent than the ones where people are saying, like, you know what, we want to take care of you. We don't want you leaving here completely spent. So my great hope is that we can come to just an agreement that a 2-hour vocally stressful session, for the reasons I've told you, is just the right thing to do. And that
Jennifer, what are your thoughts on where we ended up with this issue of vocal stress?
Ditto to everything Keythe said. I think that, having been in those rooms, we got as far as we were going to get in every single corner of this contract. I mean, I know I myself, when we were in the room that last day, I even pushed it past the point you're not supposed to ask for any more, because that's just my nature. And I think that we've started a really important conversation in the community, and we've raised the level of awareness significantly. We've empowered actors. Now they don't feel singled out if they speak up, because it's part of the common conversation.
I'll respond to that as a journalist. There is certainly far greater awareness in the community of the interactive community of actors, the video game actors as a community. There is far more conversation, far more press coverage. In looking at the agreement, as perfect in some ways and imperfect as it is, it's always important, this is the legal hat on, to remember that a negotiation is not a shopping spree. You don't get everything you want, or even necessarily everything that you ought to have gotten. But the union certainly moved the dial here. And it's as a result of, I think, both the staff members and union members who were on the negotiating committee.
I'll say too that it comes back to that idea of organizing the industry, that actors felt, I think, for the first time, that their union was listening, that their union was responding to their needs, that they saw a list of asks that were reasonable and that were based on what they had said to somebody over lunch. And you can't overestimate that power of interpersonal contact. That's why people showed up. That's why we had 300, 400, 500 people on picket lines. Yeah. That's why we're able to exert the pressure that we were able to exert, because our members were not working. And we saw us creating new opportunities through the promulgated agreements for them to work, even as the strike was going on. So it's a bit of a non-traditional strike in that way, in that we wanted to try to make as much work for our members, even as we were excluding some of it for a period of time. And so I'm just grateful for a new approach. And I hope that this approach can grow to animation, to TV theatrical, that idea that someone is listening to you, that someone who represents your union is concerned about what you think and is concerned about your safety.
To add on, Keythe, to what you just said, one of the huge wins we had actually two of the huge wins we had out of this strike have nothing to do with what we did or didn't get in the contract. One of them is this phenomenally expanded relationships with devs and indies. We actively reached out into that community, and the second win fed into the victory we had there. And the second win is the unity in the community. We had the non-union actors come together for 3 meetings where we union actors invited them together with us to sit down and talk about what they need and what they want, and let them know that they're part of the world too, and they matter as well. And let's all move to the same place.
Nice.
And the level of unity is unprecedented. The culture that was created is significantly different than anything I've ever been experienced, seen, dealt with in the past. And I think, a lot of that's down to Keythe's leadership and the activities of the organizers at the union. Mm-hmm.
Keythe, one final question, and it's yours. And I have heard a number of times over the past 6-7 years that voice actors within the larger context of SAG-AFTRA tend to get little attention. Do you feel, as a result of the increased unity that Jennifer just spoke about, that voice acting in general is going to be taken more seriously within the SAG-AFTRA leadership?
Undoubtedly. I think that they've looked to this area. The organizing really started with dancers, and then it went to audiobooks, which is a voiceover field, and then it came to interactive. And so I think through that movement of starting with in areas where there was growth, and where there was an opportunity to sort of claim new ground for union actors, that's where they started with the organizing. And I think that as that idea of listening to your membership, and as they become more responsive, you can't play SAG against AFTRA anymore. And that was the game that we saw in 2008, where SAG refused to ratify and AFTRA did, and all the work went to AFTRA. And it's the same thing that I always say when we talk about if they want to talk about the war between the actors and the developers, and I say, I know who wins that war, and it's the publishers.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no war between, we are part of the development process. We are part of, and I think that devs are realizing that. I think that actors are realizing that, and that the more we see it as a partnership, then the more we can really start to talk about what it is that we need in a way that feels less confrontative and more invitational. And I hope that that's the future for the union in general.
And on that note, I think that we're going to call it a day. Jonathan Handel, Keythe Farley, Jennifer Hale, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend it with us.
Thank you.
My
And
pleasure.
Thanks to everyone out there. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Fantastic.
It was wonderful. It was such a great and very insightful. It was so insightful. Really, really helpful. Thank you so much, guys.